Audio File 8 of the Mueller Report. Volume 2. Obstruction Investigation Part 1. This text was edited for text-to-speech by Mueller Report AudioBook.com, and the text and the audio are copyright 2019, all rights reserved. Section 2. This section of the report details the evidence we obtained. We first provide an overview of how Russia became an issue in the 2016 presidential campaign, and how candidate Trump responded. We then come to the key events that we investigated: the President's conduct concerning the FBI investigation of Michael Flynn, the President's reaction to public confirmation of the FBI's Russia investigation, events leading up to and surrounding the termination of FBI Director Comey, efforts to terminate the Special Counsel, efforts to curtail the scope of the Special Counsel's investigation, efforts to prevent disclosure of information about the June 9, 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Russians and senior campaign officials, efforts to have the Attorney General unrecuse, and conduct towards McGahn, Cohen, and other witnesses. We summarize the evidence we found and then analyze it by reference to the three statutory obstruction of justice elements: obstructive act, nexus to a proceeding, and intent. We focus on elements because, by regulation, the Special Counsel has jurisdiction to investigate federal crimes committed in the course of, and with intent to interfere with, the Special Counsel's investigation, such as perjury, obstruction of justice, destruction of evidence, and intimidation of witnesses. 28 CFR 600. 4 a. Consistent with our jurisdiction to investigate federal obstruction crimes, we gathered evidence that is relevant to the elements of those crimes and analyzed them within an elements framework while refraining from reaching ultimate conclusions about whether crimes were committed, for the reasons explained above. This section also does not address legal and constitutional defenses raised by counsel for the President. Those defenses are analyzed in Volume 2, Section 3. A. The campaign's response to reports about Russian support for Trump. During the 2016 campaign, the media raised questions about a possible connection between the Trump campaign and Russia. 7. The questions intensified after WikiLeaks released politically damaging Democratic Party emails that were reported to have been hacked by Russia. Trump responded to questions about possible connections to Russia by denying any business involvement in Russia, even though the Trump Organization had pursued a business project in Russia as late as June 2016. Trump also expressed skepticism that Russia had hacked the emails at the same time as he and other campaign advisors privately sought information about any further planned WikiLeaks releases. After the election, when questions persisted about possible links between Russia and the Trump campaign, the president-elect continued to deny any connections to Russia and privately expressed concerns that reports' interference might lead the public to question the legitimacy of his election. This section summarizes and cites various news stories not for the truth of the information contained in the stories, but rather to place candidate Trump's response to those stories in context. Volume 1 of this report analyzes the underlying facts of several relevant events that were reported on by the media during the campaign. As discussed in Volume 1, while the investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign, the evidence was not sufficient to charge that any member of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with representatives of the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. 1. Press reports allege links between the Trump campaign and Russia. On June 16, 2015, Donald J. Trump declared his intent to seek nomination as the Republican candidate for president. 9. By early 2016, he distinguished himself among Republican candidates by speaking of closer ties with Russia, saying he would get along well with Russian President Vladimir Putin, questioning whether the NATO alliance was obsolete, and praising Putin as a strong leader. 13. The press reported that Russian political analysts and commentators perceived Trump as favorable to Russia. Beginning in February 2016 and continuing through the summer, the media reported that several Trump campaign advisors appeared to have ties to Russia. For example, the press reported that campaign advisor Michael Flynn was seated next to Vladimir Putin at an RT gala in Moscow in December 2015 and that Flynn had appeared regularly on RT as an analyst. The press also reported that foreign policy advisor Carter Page had ties to a Russian state-run gas company, and that campaign chairman Paul Manafort had done work for the Russian-backed former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. In addition, the press raised questions during the Republican National Convention about the Trump campaign's involvement in changing the Republican platform's stance on giving weapons to Ukraine to fight Russian and rebel forces. 2. The Trump campaign reacts to WikiLeaks' release of hacked emails. On June 14, 2016, a cybersecurity firm that had conducted in-house analysis for the Democratic National Committee (DNC) posted an announcement that Russian government hackers had infiltrated the DNC's computer and obtained access to documents. On July 22, 2016, the day before the Democratic National Convention, WikiLeaks posted thousands of hacked DNC documents revealing sensitive internal deliberations. Soon thereafter, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager publicly contended that Russia had hacked the DNC emails and arranged their release in order to help candidate Trump. On July 26, 2016, The New York Times reported that U.S. intelligence agencies had told the White House they now have high confidence that the Russian government was behind the theft of emails and documents from the Democratic National Committee. Within the Trump campaign, aides reacted with enthusiasm to reports of the hacks, discussed with campaign officials that WikiLeaks would release the hacked material. Some witnesses said that Trump himself discussed the possibility of upcoming releases. Michael Cohen, then executive vice president of the Trump Organization and special counsel to Trump, recalled hearing Cohen recalled that Trump responded, "Oh good, all right." Manafort recalled that Trump responded that Manafort should redact it. At the same time Gates was with Trump on a trip to an airport, and shortly after the call ended, Trump told Gates that more releases of damaging information would be coming, were discussed within the campaign, and in the summer of 2016, the campaign was planning a communications strategy based on the possible release of Clinton emails by WikiLeaks. 3. The Trump campaign reacts to allegations that Russia was seeking to aid candidate Trump campaign. In the days that followed WikiLeaks's July 22, 2016 release of hacked DNC emails, the Trump campaign publicly rejected suggestions that Russia was seeking to aid candidate Trump. On July 26, 2016, Trump tweeted that it was crazy to suggest that Russia was dealing with Trump, on that for the record, he had zero investments in Russia. In a press conference the next day, July 27, 2016, Trump characterized this whole thing with Russia as a total deflection and stated that it was far-fetched and ridiculous. Trump said that the assertion that Russia had hacked the emails was unproven, but stated that it would give him no pause if Russia had Clinton's emails. Trump added, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press." Trump also said that "there's nothing that I can think of that I'd rather do than have Russia friendly as opposed to the way they are right now," and in response to a question about whether he would recognize Crimea as Russian territory and consider lifting sanctions, Trump replied, "We'll be looking at that. Yeah, we'll be looking." During the press conference, Trump repeated "I have nothing to do with Russia" 5 times. He stated that the closest he came to Russia was that Russians may have purchased a home or condos from him. He said that after he held the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow in 2013 he had been interested in working with Russian companies that wanted to put a lot of money into developments in Russia, but it never worked out. He explained, "Frankly, I didn't want to do it for a couple of different reasons. But we had a major developer that wanted to develop property in Moscow and other places. But we decided not to do it." The Trump Organization, however, had been pursuing a building project in Moscow, the Trump Tower Moscow project, from approximately September 2015 through June 2016, and the candidate was regularly updated on developments, including possible trips by Michael Cohen to Moscow to promote the deal and by Trump himself to finalize it. Cohen recalled speaking with Trump after the press conference about Trump's denial of any business dealings in Russia, which Cohen regarded as untrue. Trump told Cohen that Trump Tower Moscow was not a deal yet and said, "Why mention it if it is not a deal?" According to Cohen, at around this time, in response to Trump's disavowal of connections to Russia, campaign advisors had developed a party line that Trump had no business with Russia and no connections to Russia. In addition to denying any connections with Russia, the Trump campaign reacted to reports of Russian election interference in aid of the campaign by seeking to distance itself from Russian contacts. For example, in August 2016, Foreign Policy Advisor J.D. Gordon declined an invitation to Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislak's residence because the timing was not optimal in view of media reports about Russian interference. On August 19, 2016, Manafort was asked to resign amid media coverage scrutinizing his ties to a pro-Russian political party in Ukraine and links to Russian business. And when the media published stories about Page's connections to Russia in September 2016, Trump campaign officials terminated Page's association with the campaign and told the press that he had played no role in the campaign. On October 7, 2016, WikiLeaks released the first set of emails stolen by a Russian intelligence agency from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. The same day, the federal government announced that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. The Governmente statement directly linked Russian hacking to the releases on WikiLeaks, with the goal of interfering with the presidential election, and concluded that only Russia's senior-most officials could have authorized these activities based on their scope and sensitivity. On October 11, 2016, Podesta stated publicly that the FBI was investigating Russia's hacking and said that candidate Trump might have known in advance that the hacked emails were going to be released. Vice presidential candidate Mike Pence was asked whether the Trump campaign was in cahoots with WikiLeaks in releasing damaging Clinton-related information and responded, "Nothing could be further from the truth." After the election, Trump continues to deny any contacts or connections with Russia or that Russia aided his election. On November 8, 2016, Trump was elected president. 2 days later, Russian officials told the press that the Russian government had maintained contacts with Trump's immediate entourage during the campaign. In response, Hope Hicks, who had been the Trump campaign spokesperson, said, "We are not aware of any campaign representatives that were in touch with any foreign entities before yesterday, when Mr. Trump spoke with many world leaders." Hicks gave an additional statement denying any contacts between the campaign and Russia. "It never happened. There was no communication between the campaign and any foreign entity during the campaign." On December 10, 2016, the press reported that U.S. intelligence agencies had concluded that Russia interfered in last month's presidential election to boost Donald Trump's bid for the White House. Reacting to the story the next day, President-elect Trump stated, "I think it's ridiculous. I think it's just another excuse." He continued that no one really knew who was responsible for the hacking, suggesting that the intelligence community had no idea if it's Russia or China or somebody. It could be somebody sitting in a bed someplace. The president-elect also said that Democrats were putting out the story of Russian interference because they suffered one of the greatest defeats in the history of politics. On December 18, 2016, Podesta told the press that the election was distorted by the Russian intervention and questioned whether Trump campaign officials had been in touch with the Russians. The same day, incoming Chief of Staff Reince Priebus appeared on Fox News Sunday and declined to say whether the president-elect accepted the intelligence community's determination that Russia intervened in the election. When asked about any contact or coordination between the campaign and Russia, Priebus said, "Even this question is insane. Of course we didn't interface with the Russians." Priebus added that this whole thing is a spin job and said, "The real question is, why the Democrats are doing everything they can to delegitimize the outcome of the election?" On December 29, 2016, the Obama administration announced that in response to Russian cyber operations aimed at the U.S. election, it was imposing sanctions and other measures on several Russian individuals and entities. When first asked about the sanctions, President-elect Trump said, "I think we ought to get on with our lives." He then put out a statement that said it's time for our country to move on to bigger and better things, but indicated that he would meet with intelligence community leaders the following week for a briefing on Russian interference. The briefing occurred on January 6, 2017. Following the briefing, the intelligence community released the public version of its assessment, which concluded with high confidence that Russia had intervened in the election through a variety of means with the goal of harming Clinton's electability. The assessment further concluded with high confidence that Putin and the Russian government had developed a clear preference for Trump. Several days later, BuzzFeed published unverified allegations compiled by former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele during the campaign about candidate Trump's Russia connections under the headline "These reports allege Trump has deep ties to Russia." In a press conference the next day, the president-elect called the release an absolute disgrace and said, "I have no dealings with Russia. I have no deals that could happen in Russia, because we've stayed away. So I have no deals, I have no loans and I have no dealings. We could make deals in Russia very easily if we wanted to, I just don't want to because I think that would be a conflict." Several advisers recalled that the president-elect viewed stories about his Russian connections, the Russia investigations, and the intelligence community assessment of Russian interference as a threat to the legitimacy of his electoral victory. Hicks, for example, said that the president-elect viewed the intelligence community assessment as his Achilles heel because, even if Russia had no impact on the election, people would think Russia helped him win, taking away from what he had accomplished. Sean Spicer, the first White House communications director, recalled that the president thought the Russia story was developed to undermine the legitimacy of his election. Gates said the president viewed the Russia investigation as an attack on the legitimacy of his win. And Priebus recalled that when the intelligence assessment came out, the president-elect was concerned people would question the legitimacy of his win. This text was edited for text-to-speech by Mueller Report AudioBook.com, and the text and the audio are copyright 2019, all rights reserved. B. The President's conduct concerning the investigation of Michael Flynn. Overview. During the presidential transition, incoming National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had 2 phone calls with the Russian ambassador to the United States about the Russian response to U.S. sanctions imposed because of Russia's election interference. After the press reported on Flynn's contacts with the Russian ambassador, Flynn lied to incoming administration officials by saying he had not discussed sanctions on the calls. The officials publicly repeated those lies in press interviews. The FBI, which previously was investigating Flynn for other matters, interviewed him about the calls in the first week after the inauguration, and Flynn told similar lies to the FBI. On January 26, 2017, Department of Justice (DOJ) officials notified the White House that Flynn and the Russian ambassador had discussed sanctions and that Flynn had been interviewed by the FBT. The next night, the president had a private dinner with FBI Director James Comey in which he asked for Comey's loyalty. On February 13, 2017, the president asked Flynn to resign. The following day, the president had a one-on-one conversation with Comey in which he said, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go." Evidence. 1. Incoming National Security Advisor Flynn discusses sanctions on Russia with Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak shortly after the election. President-elect Trump announced he would appoint Michael Flynn as his national security advisor. For the next 2 months, Flynn played an active role on the Presidential Transition Team (PTT), coordinating policy positions and communicating with foreign government officials, including Russian Ambassador to the United States Sergei Kislyak. On December 29, 2016, as noted in Volume 2, Section TT. A. 4, Supra, the Obama administration announced that it was imposing sanctions and other measures on several Russian individuals and entities. That day, multiple members of the PTT exchanged emails about the sanctions and the impact they would have on the incoming administration, and Flynn informed members of the PTT that he would be speaking to the Russian ambassador later in the day. Flynn, who was in the Dominican Republic at the time, and K.T. McFarland, who was slated to become the Deputy National Security Advisor and was at the Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida with the President-elect and other senior staff, talked by phone about what, if anything, Flynn should communicate to Kislyak about the sanctions. McFarland had spoken with incoming administration officials about the sanctions and Russia's possible responses and thought she had mentioned in those conversations that Flynn was scheduled to speak with Kislyak. Based on those conversations, McFarland informed Flynn that incoming administration officials at Mar-a-Lago did not want Russia to escalate the situation. At 4:43 p.m. that afternoon, McFarland sent an email to several officials about the sanctions and informed the group that Gen Flynn is talking to Russian ambassador this evening. Approximately 1 hour later, McFarland met with the president-elect and senior officials and briefed them on the sanctions and Russia's possible responses. Incoming Chief of Staff Reince Priebus recalled that McFarland may have mentioned at the meeting that the sanctions situation could be cooled down and not escalated. McFarland recalled that at the end of the meeting, someone may have mentioned to the president-elect that Flynn was speaking to the Russian ambassador that evening. McFarland did not recall any response by the president-elect. 89 Priebus recalled that the president-elect viewed the sanctions as an attempt by the Obama administration to embarrass him by delegitimizing his election. Immediately after discussing the sanctions with McFarland on December 29, 2016, Flynn called Kislak and requested that Russia respond to the sanctions only in a reciprocal manner, without escalating the situation. After the call, Flynn briefed McFarland on its substance. Flynn told McFarland that the Russian response to the sanctions was not going to be escalatory because Russia wanted a good relationship with the Trump administration. On December 30, 2016, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would not take retaliatory measures in response to the sanctions at that time and would instead plan further steps to restore Russian-US relations based on the policies of the Trump administration. Following that announcement, the president-elect tweeted, "Great move on delay by V. Putin. I always knew he was very smart." On December 31, 2016, Kislak called Flynn and told him that Flynn's request had been received at the highest levels and Russia had chosen not to retaliate in response to the request. Later that day, Flynn told McFarland about this follow-up conversation with Kislak and Russia's decision not to escalate the sanctions situation based on Flynn's request. McFarland recalled that Flynn thought his phone call had made a difference. Flynn spoke with other incoming administration officials that day, but does not recall whether they discussed the sanctions. Flynn recalled discussing the sanctions issue with incoming administration official Stephen Bannon the next day. Flynn said that Bannon appeared to know about Flynn's conversations with Kislak, and he and Bannon agreed that they had stopped the train on Russia's response to the sanctions. On January 3, 2017, Flynn saw the president-elect in person and thought they discussed the Russian reaction to the sanctions, but Flynn did not have a specific recollection of telling the president-elect about the substance of his calls with Kislak. Members of the intelligence community were surprised by Russia's decision not to retaliate in response to the sanctions. When analyzing Russia's response, they became aware of Flynn's discussion of sanctions with Kislak. Previously, the FBI had opened an investigation of Flynn based on his relationship with the Russian government. Flynn's contacts with Kislak became a key component of that investigation. 2. President-elect Trump is briefed on the intelligence community's assessment of Russian interference in the election and Congress opens election interference investigations. On January 6, 2017, as noted in Volume 2, Section 11A, 4, Supra, intelligence officials briefed President-elect Trump and the incoming administration on the intelligence community's assessment that Russia had interfered in the 2016 presidential election. When the briefing concluded, Comey spoke with the president-elect privately to brief him on unverified, personally sensitive allegations compiled by Steele. According to a memorandum Comey drafted immediately after their private discussion, the president-elect began the meeting by telling Comey he had conducted himself honorably over the prior year and had a great reputation. The president-elect stated that he thought highly of Comey, looked forward to working with him, and hoped that he planned to stay on as FBI director. Comey responded that he intended to continue serving in that role. Comey then briefed the president-elect on the sensitive material in the Steele reporting. Comey recalled that the president-elect seemed defensive, so Comey decided to assure him that the FBI was not investigating him personally. Comey recalled he did not want the president-elect to think of the conversation as a J. Edgar Hoover move. On January 10, 2017, the media reported that Comey had briefed the president-elect on the Steele reporting, and BuzzFeed News published information compiled by Steele online, stating that the information included specific, unverified, and potentially unverifiable allegations of contact between Trump aides and Russian operatives. The next day, the president-elect expressed concern to intelligence community leaders about the fact that the information had leaked and asked whether they could make public statements refuting the allegations in the Steele reports. In the following weeks, 3 congressional committees opened investigations to examine Russia's interference in the election and whether the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia. On January 13, 2017, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence (SSCT) announced that it would conduct a bipartisan inquiry into Russian interference in the election, including any links between Russia and individuals associated with political campaigns. On January 25, 2017, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence (HPSC) announced that it had been conducting an investigation into Russian election interference and possible coordination with the political campaigns. And on February 2, 2017, the Senate Judiciary Committee announced that it too would investigate Russian efforts to intervene in the election. 3. Flynn makes false statements about his communications with Kislak-To incoming administration officials, the media, and the FBI. On January 12, 2017, a Washington Post columnist reported that Flynn and Kislak communicated on the day the Obama administration announced the Russia sanctions. The column questioned whether Flynn had said something to undercut the U.S. sanctions and whether Flynn's communications had violated the letter or spirit of the Logan Act. President-elect Trump called Priebus after the story was published and expressed anger about it. Priebus recalled that the president-elect asked, "What the hell is this all about?" Priebus called Flynn and told him that the president-elect was angry about the reporting on Flynn's conversations with Kislak. Flynn recalled that he felt a lot of pressure because Priebus had spoken to the boss and said Flynn needed to kill the story. Flynn directed McFarland to call the Washington Post columnist and inform him that no discussion of sanctions had occurred. McFarland recalled that Flynn said words to the effect of, "I want to kill the story." McFarland made the call as Flynn had requested, although she knew she was providing false information, and the Washington Post updated the column to reflect that a Trump official had denied that Flynn and Kislak discussed sanctions. When Priebus and other incoming administration officials questioned Flynn internally about the Washington Post column, Flynn maintained that he had not discussed sanctions with Kislak. Flynn repeated that claim to Vice President-elect Michael Pence and to incoming Press Secretary Sean Spicer. In subsequent media interviews in mid-January, Pence, Priebus, and Spicer denied that Flynn and Kislak had discussed sanctions, basing those denials on their conversations with Flynn. The public statements of incoming administration officials denying that Flynn and Kislak had discussed sanctions alarmed senior DOJ officials, who were aware that the statements were not true. Those officials were concerned that Flynn had lied to his colleagues, who in turn had unwittingly misled the American public, creating a compromise situation for Flynn because the Department of Justice assessed that the Russian government could prove Flynn lied. The FBI investigative team also believed that Flynn's calls with Kislak and subsequent denials about discussing sanctions raised potential Logan Act issues and were relevant to the FBI's broader Russia investigation. On January 20, 2017, President Trump was inaugurated and Flynn was sworn in as National Security Advisor. On January 23, 2017, Spicer delivered his first press briefing and stated that he had spoken with Flynn the night before, who confirmed that the calls with Kislak were about topics unrelated to sanctions. Spicer's statements added to the Department of Justice's concerns that Russia had leverage over Flynn based on his lies and could use that derogatory information to compromise him. On January 24, 2017, Flynn agreed to be interviewed by agents from the FBI. During the interview, which took place at the White House, Flynn falsely stated that he did not ask Kislak to refrain from escalating the situation in response to the sanctions on Russia imposed by the Obama administration. Flynn also falsely stated that he did not remember a follow-up conversation in which Kislak stated that Russia had chosen to moderate its response to those sanctions as a result of Flynn's request. 4. DOJ officials notify the White House of their CONC_earns about Flynn. On January 26, 2017, Acting Attorney General Sally Yates contacted White House counsel Donald McGahn and informed him that she needed to discuss a sensitive matter with him in person. Later that day, Yates and Mary McCord, a senior national security official at the Department of Justice, met at the White House with McGahn and White House counsel's office attorney James Burnham. Yates said that the public statements made by the vice president denying that Flynn and Kislyak discussed sanctions were not true and put Flynn in a potentially compromised position because the Russians would know he had lied. Yates disclosed that Flynn had been interviewed by the FBI. Declined to answer a specific question about how Flynn had performed during that interview, but she indicated that Flynn's statements to the FBI were similar to the statements he had made to Pence and Spicer denying that he had discussed sanctions. McGahn came away from the meeting with the impression that the FBI had not pinned Flynn down in lies, but he asked John Eisenberg, who served as legal advisor to the National Security Council, to examine potential legal issues raised by Flynn's FBI interview and his contacts with Kislyak. That afternoon, McGahn notified the president that Yates had come to the White House to discuss concerns about Flynn. McGahn described what Yates had told him, and the president asked him to repeat it, so he did. McGahn recalled that when he described the FBI interview of Flynn, he said that Flynn did not disclose having discussed sanctions with Kislyak, but that there may not have been a clear violation of 18 U.S.C. I-001. The president asked about Section 1001, and McGahn explained the law to him, and also explained the Logan Act. The president instructed McGahn to work with Priebus and Bannon to look into the matter further and directed that they not discuss it with any other officials. Priebus recalled that the president was angry with Flynn in light of what Yates had told the White House and said, "Not again, this guy, this stuff." That evening, the president dined with several senior advisors and asked the group what they thought about FBI Director Comey. According to Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates, who was at the dinner, no one openly advocated terminating Comey, but the consensus on him was not positive. Coates told the group that he thought Comey was a good director. Coates encouraged the president to meet Comey face-to-face and spend time with him before making a decision about whether to retain him. McGahn has a follow-up meeting about Flynn with Yates. President Trump has dinner with FBI Director Comey. The next day, January 27, 2017, McGahn and Eisenberg discussed the results of Eisenberg's initial legal research into Flynn's conduct, and specifically whether Flynn may have violated the Espionage Act, the Logan Act, or 18 U.S.C. 1001. Based on his preliminary research, Eisenberg informed McGahn that there was a possibility that Flynn had violated 18 U.S.C. 1001 and the Logan Act. Eisenberg noted that the United States had never successfully prosecuted an individual under the Logan Act and that Flynn could have possible defenses, and told McGahn that he believed it was unlikely that a prosecutor would pursue a Logan Act charge under the circumstances. That same morning, McGahn asked Yates to return to the White House to discuss Flynn again. In that second meeting, McGahn expressed doubts that the Department of Justice would bring a Logan Act prosecution against Flynn, but stated that the White House did not want to take action that would interfere with an ongoing FBI investigation of Flynn. Yates responded that Department of Justice had notified the White House so that it could take action in response to the information provided. McGahn ended the meeting by asking Yates for access to the underlying information the Department of Justice possessed pertaining to Flynn's discussions with Kislyak. Also on January 27, the president called FBI Director Comey and invited him to dinner that evening. Priebus recalled that before the dinner, he told the president something like, "Don't talk about Russia, whatever you do," and the president promised he would not talk about Russia at the dinner. McGahn had previously advised the president that he should not communicate directly with the Department of Justice to avoid the perception or reality of political interference in law enforcement. When Bannon learned about the president's planned dinner with Comey, he suggested that he or Priebus also attend, but the president stated that he wanted to dine with Comey alone. Comey said that when he arrived for the dinner that evening, he was surprised and concerned to see that no one else had been invited. Comey provided an account of the dinner in a contemporaneous memo, an interview with this office, and congressional testimony. According to Comey's account of the dinner, the president repeatedly brought up Comey's future, asking whether he wanted to stay on as FBI director. Because the president had previously said he wanted Comey to stay on as FBI director, Comey interpreted the president's comments as an effort to create a patronage relationship by having Comey ask for his job. The president also brought up the Steele reporting that Comey had raised in the January 6, 2017 briefing and stated that he was thinking about ordering the FBI to investigate the allegations to prove they were false. Comey responded that the president should think carefully about issuing such an order because it could create a narrative that the FBI was investigating him personally, which was incorrect. Later in the dinner, the president brought up Flynn and said, "The guy has serious judgment issues." Comey did not comment on Flynn and the president did not acknowledge any FBI interest in or contact with Flynn. According to Comey's account, at one point during the dinner the president stated, "I need loyalty, I expect loyalty." Comey did not respond and the conversation moved on to other topics, but the president returned to the subject of Comey's job at the end of the dinner and repeated, "I need loyalty." Comey responded, "You will always get honesty from me." The president said, "That's what I want, honest loyalty." Comey said, "You will get that from me." After Comey's account of the dinner became public, the president and his advisers disputed that he had asked for Comey's loyalty. The president also indicated that he had not invited Comey to dinner, telling a reporter that he thought Comey had asked for the dinner because he wanted to stay on. But substantial evidence corroborates Comey's account of the dinner invitation and the request for loyalty. The president's daily diary confirms that the president extended a dinner invitation to Comey on January 27. With respect to the substance of the dinner conversation, Comey documented the president's request for loyalty in a memorandum he began drafting the night of the dinner. Senior FBI officials recall that Comey told them about the loyalty request shortly after the dinner occurred, and Comey described the request while under oath in congressional proceedings and in a subsequent interview with investigators subject to penalties for lying under 18 U.S.C.I. Comey's memory of the details of the dinner, including that the president requested loyalty, has remained consistent throughout. Flynn's resignation on February 2, 2017, Eisenberg reviewed the underlying information relating to Flynn's calls with Kislak. Eisenberg recalled that he prepared a memorandum about criminal statutes that could apply to Flynn's conduct, but he did not believe the White House had enough information to make a definitive recommendation to the president. Eisenberg and McGahn discussed that Eisenberg's review of the underlying information confirmed his preliminary conclusion that Flynn was unlikely to be prosecuted for violating the Logan Act. Because White House officials were uncertain what Flynn had told the FBI, however, they could not assess his exposure to prosecution for violating 18 U.S.C. 1001. The week of February 6, Flynn had a one-on-one conversation with the president in the Oval Office about the negative media coverage of his contacts with Kislak. Flynn recalled that the president was upset and asked him for information on the conversations. Flynn listed the specific dates on which he remembered speaking with Kislak, but the president corrected one of the dates he listed. The president asked Flynn what he and Kislak discussed and Flynn responded that he might have talked about sanctions. On February 9, 2017, The Washington Post reported that Flynn discussed sanctions with Kislak the month before the president took office. After the publication of that story, Vice President Pence learned of the Department of Justice's notification to the White House about the content of Flynn's calls. He and other advisers then sought access to and reviewed the underlying information about Flynn's contacts with Kislak. FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who provided the White House officials access to the information and was present when they reviewed it, recalled the officials asking him whether Flynn's conduct violated the Logan Act. McCabe responded that he did not know, but the FBI was investigating the matter because it was a possibility. Based on the evidence of Flynn's contacts with Kislak, McGahn and Priebus concluded that Flynn could not have forgotten the details of the discussions of sanctions and had instead been lying about what he discussed with Kislak. Flynn had also told White House officials that the FBI had told him that the FBI was closing out its investigation of him, but Eisenberg did not believe him. After reviewing the materials and speaking with Flynn, McGahn and Priebus concluded that Flynn should be terminated and recommended that course of action to the president. That weekend, Flynn accompanied the president to Mar-a-Lago. Flynn recalled that on February 12, 2017, on the return flight to D.C. on Air Force One, the president asked him whether he had lied to the vice president. Flynn responded that he may have forgotten details of his calls, but he did not think he lied. The president responded, "Okay. That's fine. Got it." On February 13, 2017, Priebus told Flynn he had to resign. Flynn said he wanted to say goodbye to the president, so Priebus brought him to the Oval Office. Priebus recalled that the president hugged Flynn, shook his hand, and said, "We'll give you a good recommendation. You're a good guy. We'll take care of you." Talking points on the resignation prepared by the White House counsel's office and distributed to the White House communications team stated that McGahn had advised the president that Flynn was unlikely to be prosecuted, and the president had determined that the issue with Flynn was one of trust. Spicer told the press the next day that Flynn was forced to resign not based on a legal issue, but based on a trust issue, where a level of trust between the president and General Flynn had eroded to the point where the president felt he had to make a change. The president discusses Flynn with FBI Director Comey. On February 14, 2017, the day after Flynn's resignation, the president had lunch at the White House with New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. According to Christie, at one point during the lunch the president said, "Now that we fired Flynn, the Russia thing is over." Christie laughed and responded, "No way." He said, "This Russia thing is far from over and we'll be here on Valentine's Day 2018 talking about this." The president said, "What do you mean? Flynn met with the Russians. That was the problem. I fired Flynn. It's over." Christie recalled responding that based on his experience both as a prosecutor and as someone who had been investigated, firing Flynn would not end the investigation. Christie said there was no way to make an investigation shorter, but a lot of ways to make it longer. The president asked Christie what he meant, and Christie told the president not to talk about the investigation even if he was frustrated at times. Christie also told the president that he would never be able to get rid of Flynn, like gum on the bottom of your shoe. Towards the end of the lunch, the president brought up Comey and asked if Christie was still friendly with him. Christie said he was. The president told Christie to call Comey and tell him that the president really likes him. Tell him he's part of the team. At the end of the lunch, the president repeated his request that Christie reach out to Comey. Christie had no intention of complying with the president's request that he contact Comey. He thought the president's request was nonsensical and Christie did not want to put Comey in the position of having to receive such a phone call. Christie thought it would have been uncomfortable to pass on that message. At 4 p.m. that afternoon, the president met with Comey, Sessions, and other officials for a Homeland Security briefing. At the end of the briefing, the president dismissed the other attendees and stated that he wanted to speak to Comey alone. Sessions and senior advisor to the president Jared Kushner remained in the Oval Office as other participants left, but the president excused them, repeating that he wanted to speak only with Comey. At some point after others had left the Oval Office, Priebus opened the door, but the president sent him away. According to Comey's account of the meeting, once